Hello, and thank you for joining me. This is a series of ghostly and paranormal stories. I hope you enjoy them. The Black Dog. Tom Henderson bought the old Johnson house that sits through the forest on top of the hill on the outskirts of town. The house had sat dormant for a number of years, but Tom was new in town and the home was cheap. He moved in right away, got the house all set up, and looked forward to living in his new surroundings. He decided to head to bed early the first night, as he was looking forward to checking out the forest surrounding his home, since he was a hunter and did it for a living. As Tom lay in bed, just about to doze off, he thought he heard movement just above his bedroom, but he brushed it off as just creaks in an old house, and rolled over and closed his eyes. But after just a few minutes, he heard what sounded like a dog's paws click across the wooden hallway floor. He knew it wasn't his dogs, because they were outside, so he jumped out of bed and ran into the hall to check what could have made that noise. But nothing was there. He checked the entire house from top to bottom, then looked outside to see if his dogs were still chained up, which they were. Saw nothing unusual, and headed up to his room, locked the door, and went to bed. Tom woke the next morning quite tired from the goings-on of last night, brewed a pot of coffee, got dressed, picked up his rifle, gathered his dogs, and headed out. It was a cool morning. The autumn colors were starting to show on the trees. This is exactly what Tom moved here for. As he slowly moved through the forest, he happened upon a deer drinking in a brook. He kneeled down, shouldered his rifle, and fired, hitting the deer in the neck. As he walked towards his prize, he spotted a black object in the distance, almost stalking him, it seemed. He got up and ran towards it. The object ran off as he got closer, but stopped about 20 feet in front of him, sat, and smiled. Tom could see now it was a black dog he was chasing. His 3 dogs that sat beside him started to growl and become quite agitated. He told them to heel, but they would not listen. One of his dogs jumped up and lunged at the black dog. As his dog got close, the black dog got up and ran behind a large oak tree. Tom's dog followed, and they both disappeared behind the tree. After a few moments of growling and barking, a yelp could be heard. Tom rushed around the tree and saw his beloved dog lying on the ground, bleeding from the neck. No sign of the black dog. Tom buried his dog by the tree, went back and collected the deer, and he and his 2 dogs walked back home. On his way back, he came across 2 brothers hunting, John and Timmy Donnelly. They introduced themselves, and Tom told them that he had just moved into town and bought the old Johnson place. When he told them that, he could see that it spooked them. They asked him if he knew what had happened in that house. He of course said no. What they proceeded to tell him he thought was preposterous. They told him about 10 years ago, Mr. Johnson just snapped one night after dinner and killed his entire family. The bodies of his wife and children were still sitting at the dinner table when the police arrived, as was he, bleeding from his arm. He said their black German shepherd bit him, trying to protect his wife. The body of the black dog was found lying next to the chair of the dead wife. But the story doesn't end there. About a week later, Mr. Johnson was found in his jail cell with his throat ripped out, and bloody paw prints were found in his cell. Since then, nobody lived in the house for more than a month. Always complaints of strange noises throughout the night, barking even though they don't own a dog, black hair all over the house, even in the food, dog smells, growling, etc. Now, Tom did not believe in ghosts, and certainly he wasn't going to believe in a ghost dog. He laughed off their story and politely said goodbye. They agreed to meet up in the morning to hunt and get to know each other some more, not telling them what had just happened to his dog in the woods, thinking to himself it was probably just a wolf that they had encountered. Tom got home, brought the dogs inside, cooked up some of that deer he had just killed, and settled down to relax for the night. The next morning, the brothers knocked on the back door. They had been waiting for 25 minutes, but there was no sign of Tom. After a few more minutes of no answering, they decided to kick in the door. When they walked in, they found Tom sitting at the dinner table with his throat ripped out and his 2 dogs lying dead at his feet. Bloody paw prints covered the floor. The black hair was found throughout the room, even though neither of Tom's dogs had black hair. Redstone, Iowa, 1981. The disappearances started in June. A young high school student, Mary Thompson, never came home after work. Her walk from home usually took 15 minutes, but in that 15 minutes, she disappeared from the face of the earth. The second disappearance was her boyfriend, Tom Grant, who went missing 2 days after Mary Thompson. His parents heard a noise in the middle of the night. When they went to check on him, his bed was empty and his window was open. The local police were baffled, as no signs of a struggle were found at the site of both locations. The belief is that the couple took off and would show up again in the coming months. After this, the disappearances ramped up. In less than a week, half of the town's population of 357 souls had disappeared. The last phone call recorded came from Deputy Marshal Twett and was made to the sheriff of the neighboring town of Farnham. Twett. Hello? Is anyone there? This is Deputy Twett from Redstone. We need immediate assistance. Something is happening. People are in the streets and... Sheriff Elds arrived in Redstone with officers from Farnham at 8 a.m. the following morning. Redstone had become a ghost town. Cars were in the driveways, houses were empty, and the shades were still drawn. An abandoned doll sat in the middle of the street. Its black eyes and serious look seemed to reflect the atmosphere in Redstone that June morning. After several hours of searching the town, not one individual has been found. Several local communities were called in for the search efforts, but no trace had been found of the residents of Redstone. After several weeks, the searchers went home, and Redstone laid abandoned. 25 years later, rumors have been spread about the fate of the townspeople. Government conspiracies, alien abductions, and even satanic plots have been the reasoning for the mass disappearances. Local teenagers have reported strange eyes peering at them in the dark, and a prevailing sense of dread when traveling through the town at night. Officials are especially quiet on the subject of Redstone. The same people who will talk at great lengths about politics, the weather, and farming will go silent when asked about Redstone. Visitors are strictly prohibited and were escorted out of the town until 2002. All roads leading into the town are blocked off, and the only way to get into the town is by hiking through the surrounding farm fields and woods. The big question is what happened to all of those people? How could 357 people just vanish into thin air? Why do the surrounding communities want to keep people out of the town? The Scary Man. Robin, come in here. What have I told you about leaving lights on in the house? You know, whenever you leave a room, you turn the light off. But it wasn't me, Daddy. I swear. It was the Scary Man. This should be interesting. Robin always had an active imagination, ever since she used to pull practical jokes on her toys and invisible friends. I noticed how well she could handle her creativity. It was only until recently that she used this to get out of trouble. The Scary Man can only get us when a room is dark, Daddy. But light doesn't hurt him. It's just that he can't grab us and take us when the lights are on. So you admit to leaving the light on then? You did it to be safe from the Scary Man? No, I didn't do it. It was him. That's his trick. Whenever we leave a room and turn off the lights, he reaches around and turns them back on. We look at the bright room and get confused because we thought we turned the lights off. When we go back to turn the switch off again, he is ready for us. As soon as the light is off, he is right in front of our faces, and that's when he grabs us. The Scary Man can only take us away if we turn off a light that he turned back on. Before I began my speech about the electric bill, I stopped. I put down my book and sat up on the couch. I didn't realize until now that every light in the house was on. The Hitchhiker. I ran to my dorm room after my final class ended. I opened the door, collected my bags, said goodbye to my roommate, and walked to my car. It was winter break, and all I could think of was getting the hell out of here and going home to my family. I had no time to waste. I had to drive cross country, and if I wanted to make it home on time, I needed to leave right away. By midnight, I was driving through the Arizona desert. My eyelids were getting heavy. Cigarettes and coffee were my friends. But I couldn't stop. I was almost at the state line. Home was nearly there. As I turned the corner, my headlight caught the silhouette of what looked like a female hitchhiker. I drove past her, but almost immediately put on the brakes. I know. I should never pick up hitchhikers, but it was pitch black out there, and it had started to rain. I backed up my car, reached over, and opened the passenger side door. A petite, pale, blonde young woman bent in the door and asked if she could get a ride to Las Vegas. I said of course, since I was heading the same way. She put her bag in the back seat, closed the door, and sat up front. She thanked me profusely. I said it was no problem. I could see she was shivering from the rain, so I turned on the heater, reached in the back seat, and handed her my sweater. I asked her what she was doing out there all alone. She replied that she was on her way home from college for winter break. I told her I was doing the same, which broke the ice, and we began to get to know each other. As she was speaking, I gave her a once-over. I noticed she seemed out of place. I don't know how to explain it. Her clothes, Her mannerisms, hell, even how she spoke, seemed like it was from a different era. I didn't think too hard on it, though. She seemed like a sweet girl, and I was enjoying her company. After only a few miles, we were already becoming fast friends. It's strange, but there was just something about this girl. We even talked about hanging out during our time off before heading back to school. I even told her I would drive her back to her school on my way back to mine when our break was over. After about an hour, I noticed I was getting low on gas. Thankfully, we were now at the state line, and there was a gas station right before we crossed over into Nevada. I got out and went to pay for the gas, and asked her if she would start pumping. As I got to the door, I turned back and saw her put the hose in the gas tank. I turned around, opened the door, and told the cashier, $20 on 5, please. My friend is already pumping it. The cashier looked at me with a smirk on his face and said there's no gas being pumped on 5, looking at me like I was nuts. I handed him the 20 and said, what are you talking about? Turned and pointed towards the car and said, my friend, she's right there. Nobody was there. I ran out of the station towards the car, but there was no sign of her. She was gone, even her bag. A voice behind me said, you met Mary, mister. I turned around. It was the cashier. I asked him what he was talking about. He proceeded to ask me if I had just picked her up hitchhiking. I said yes. Then he asked me if she wore clothes that seemed from a different era, and spoke like she was from a different era as well. I said yes, that's exactly her. But how do you know that? That's Mary, he said. Everyone knows her around here. She's haunted this stretch of highway for decades now, and always this same time of year. Mary was killed in 1955. Her body was found about an hour back from where you came, lying on the side of the road with her throat cut. She was on her way back home to Vegas from college for winter break. Wait a minute. You're telling me I just gave a ride to a hitchhiking ghost? I said sarcastically. You sure did. You're not the first guy to do it, you know. The cashier said. My God, I thought to myself. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. I walked towards my car and looked inside the passenger door window to see if there was any trace of her. The only thing that was there was my sweater, lying on the passenger seat, and it was soaking wet. The doll. So I'm going to share my story. Honestly, even just talking about it makes me uncomfortable, as I feel I'm summoning it. Background info. I've had sleep paralysis since I was a child. Look up what this entails. Usually, it's a shadowy figure with a very heavy presence. It sucks. I was 10, just moved to the U.S., so all we could afford was this very small house directly across from a cemetery. This probably had nothing to do with it, but it certainly didn't help calm my 10-year-old self. My grandma always gifted me these porcelain dolls. You know the ones. They need a stand to hold them straight, and they are creepy looking, with glassy eyes. I had a shelf in my room, which was in the basement, where I kept this doll collection. They always creeped me out, but since they were gifts, I kept them. One time, my grandma brought me this extremely creepy doll. All the other dolls had some coloring in their faces, blushed cheeks, etc. This one didn't. She wore a deep red velvety dress, had extremely pale skin and glossy, dead-looking blue eyes, with straight blonde hair and bangs that were a little too short. She freaked me out. Soon after, I started having extreme sleep paralysis. Prior to this, my experiences were tame and just involved seeing a shadowy figure. Now, I started hearing loud, manic laughter, mocking me, telling me that my family couldn't hear me and I couldn't yell for help. Coming from a religious country, I immediately started praying loudly in my mind and yelling in my head that I believed in God. Now, I'm not really that religious. I don't go to church, but I did go to Catholic school for a few years. In this situation, this is all I could think of, to scream. This kept reoccurring multiple times a week, to the point I learned to sleep with my television on, and sometimes all the lights on, because that would allow me to know the passage of time during the paralysis and whether I was awake or not. The more I write, the more I'm realizing how absolutely insane this all sounds. I swear, this is 100% true. I would tell my mom, and thankfully, she would empathize with me and let me sleep in her bed, even though I was between 10 to 12 during this time. The climax was one day, during the daylight, after school, I went downstairs and the feeling of dread that usually came right before I had sleep paralysis came over me. Except this time, I was fully awake, and it was daylight. I went downstairs and heard laughter and laughter. It's important I mention that every time I had sleep paralysis, it was this effing doll that I would see reveal itself to me during the ordeal. I went to my room to find a sticker of an angel ripped in half. It was previously pasted to my bed frame. I ran upstairs, and from there, I couldn't go to the basement alone. I had to either ask my brother to come with or someone else. We moved my bed upstairs, and I shared a room with my mom. Thankfully, after a few years, we moved to a better house a few blocks away. My aunt was helping us move. She has really good intuition. She dreams about people's pregnancies and whatnot. So we never really mentioned what I went through with her. It was something we kept in-house. She stayed behind, doing general cleaning, while everyone was at the new house unpacking. When my mom came back to pick up more stuff, my aunt asked her if she had felt or seen anything in the house. My mom asked why, and my aunt casually said, "Oh, I asked because when I was cleaning alone, I saw a small child going around the house." My mom was taken aback, as obviously she knew what I had been claiming, and I even told her I felt it was a young person. That doll did not come with us to the next house. I do still have occasional sleep paralysis, but since I've had them so much, I know all the warning signs and can usually get myself out of it. The laughter never came again, though. The Axe Murder House. The Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa, is a well-known tourist attraction for ghost hunters and horror lovers alike. The site of a gruesome unsolved 1912 murder in which 6 children and 2 adults had their skulls completely crushed by the axe of an unknown perpetrator, was purchased in 1994, restored to its 1912 condition, and converted into a tourist destination. It cost $428 a night to stay at the old haunted home, where visitors always report strange paranormal experiences, such as visions of a man with an axe roaming the halls, or the faint screams of children. But in November of 2014, the haunting took a darker turn. Robert Stephen Larson Jr., 37, of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, was on a regular recreational paranormal visit with friends when true horror struck. His companions found him stabbed in the chest, an apparently self-inflicted wound, called 911, and Larson was brought to a nearby hospital before being helicoptered to Creighton University Medical Center in Omaha. The Montgomery County Sheriff's Office said Larson suffered the self-inflicted injury at about 12:45 a.m., which is around the same time the 1912 axe murders in the house began. Larson recovered from his injuries, but has never spoken publicly about what occurred that day. For Martha Lynn, the owner of the home, the incident was very upsetting. It's publicity, but it's not exactly the kind of publicity you desire to have. I don't want people thinking that when they come to the Villisca Axe Murder House, something's going to happen that's going to make them do something like that. The house remains open for tourist visits and overnight stays today. Nightcap. He came in without a pleasantry, seating himself directly in front of me. The entire right side of his face was gone, his skin raw with road rash. His skull grinned at me, while the rest of his face remained sullen. "Need a drink, friend?" I gulped. He shook his head, causing his exposed brain to wiggle like gelatin. "No, thanks." I nodded nervously and went back to drawing glasses. From a young age, I realized that there were things I could see that others never gave a second glance. You know, ghosts, dead people. It took time, but I learned to take it in stride. My gift probably had something to do with it, but my bar's location on the outskirts of this highly forgettable town undoubtedly lends a hand as well. Sure, I've got my regulars. They shuffle in from a day of hard labor, their boots progressively dustier and their limbs stiffer with each passing day. Most of them have known me since I was just a tyke, and this was still my father's bar. And then there are the dead. Even though they can't see them, my regulars sense something in the air later in the night. It's rare for me to have a living customer past 10 o'clock. That's when they start arriving. Most of them don't realize they've died, or they're still in denial about it. They just want to talk, so I lend them an ear and pour them a drink. They don't seem to notice that the glass never empties, no matter how many times they toss it back. That's usually all they want, but this ghost was different. "So, let me guess, motorcycle accident?" I asked after a while. "Nah, hit and run. Never saw it coming." "Oh, sorry," I muttered, at a loss for anything else to say. Just then the door flung open and a man in a suit burst in, talking into his phone at full volume. "No idea. Fucking car just died. I don't know, man. Some fucking shithole. Hold on a second. Let me ask this guy." He plopped himself to the left of the ghost, paying him no mind and firing questions at me about the bar's location. Once he concluded his call, he turned his attention back to me. While I'm here, might as well have a drink. He chuckled. Then, to my shock, he turned to the ghost. You want anything? I'm paying. Yes, the ghost rasped, turning so that his mutilated face was on full display. I'll have whatever you had the last time you were here. The man shrieked and fell out of his stool. The ghost loomed over him, the remainder of his lips now matching his skeletal smile. Remember me? Probably not, since you never even stopped. I locked the door behind me as the ghost gripped him by the collar. I did my best to ignore the screams, knowing I'd have a mess to clean tomorrow. Where the sky drops dead. You can only find it under a specific set of circumstances. You have to be traveling by yourself. Having anyone with you could lead to rational thinking, and that just won't do. This place simply cannot exist if faced with logic. In most cases, you're nearly out of gasoline. Perhaps you've left the highway, attempting to find that elusive gas station promised by the previous exit. The desperation you feel watching the fuel level dip below E will cloud your judgment. You'll deviate from your intended path, which brings me to the most important factor. You need to be lost, not just locationally, but mentally. The endless farmland and dilapidated barns should clue you in. They should be enough to tell you that you've entered no man's land. Yet you'll try your phone's GPS anyway. You'll keep an eye on the road and the other on the screen, hoping against all odds it will recalculate while you take turns and forks at random. You'll start to feel dread climbing up your stomach, that type of fear that isn't far from panic, and that's when you'll see it. At the top of a slight hill, there will be a stop sign, and beyond that, the sky drops dead. You'll park the car, rub your eyes, maybe even give yourself a good slap, but it won't change the impossibility before you. Where something should be, there's nothing. Only an infinite, ghostly mist swirling before you. On shaking legs, you'll exit the vehicle, staring into the void beyond, equal parts terrified and fascinated. All logic tells you not to go near it, but remember what I said about logic. It doesn't exist here. Against your instincts, you'll find yourself standing at the edge of the world. You're so close to non-existence that you could almost reach out and touch it. And part of you wants to. Part of you begs to, but you know better. That's when the voices start. Maybe it's a loved one, or a dead relative. Maybe some celebrity you have an infatuation with. It doesn't matter who. They will call to you. Though it's not quite enough to fool you. You keep your feet planted, no matter what they say, no matter what they promise. But the mist parts, allowing you the tiniest glimpse of the other side. Maybe it's utopia. Maybe it's your children begging for help. And this time, you take a step closer. The mist clears just a little more. By now, you're certain what you see is real. The last shred of your willpower dissolves. You're just across the border when a robotic voice from your pocket tells you to take the next right or left. It doesn't matter. You'll look back up Define the mist has disappeared. The horizon has returned. The intersection is ordinary. You'll get back to your route. You'll do your best to laugh it all off. But part of you will always wonder just which side you're on. The ghost that followed me. I used to live in this house when I was younger, since I was born to maybe the age of 6. It was a big house. It had 3 floors and 2 kitchens, one on the 3rd floor and one on the 2nd floor. I lived with my dad, grandpa, and 2 of my uncles, along with my cousin. They all have stories about this house. They all experience paranormal activity. However, the children would experience more, such as scratching on the walls, voices, shadow figures, you name it. My room was on the 3rd floor. I had 2 closets. One was just a normal closet, but the other closet had a crawling tunnel that would lead to the master bedroom, just like in the movie Caroline. We kids would go there and play. However, I remember vividly seeing an obituary in that closet of a little girl with curly blonde hair. I asked all my cousins that visited the house if they remember seeing the obituary. They all saw it, but they remember the little girl's appearance all different. I remember her with blonde curly hair. My cousin remembers the girl with black curly hair. My other cousin remembers the girl with red hair. I've asked my aunts and uncles if they remember the obituary, but none of them saw it. Only the younger children. I remember my father would tell me that when I was a toddler, I'd be laughing at something and playing with someone who wasn't there, and that the locks would lock by themselves as well. We all moved out when I was about 6 or 7 years old. However, in the new house, I would experience the same things. Now that I'm older, I remember more. I would be home alone in my bedroom upstairs and hear footsteps downstairs coming close to me. In my sleep, I felt someone grab my ankle and pull me down a little. I would have reoccurring nightmares about a girl with a white dress and long black hair chasing me. I would hear glass fall and break, but nothing broke. Once, when I was 11 years old, I was waiting for my friend outside. She lives right across from me in the complex. While I was waiting, I was jumping off the porch and climbing back up and jumping off again to buy time. I kept doing that, and I went to look at my reflection in the window of my friend across from me. After I jumped off the porch, I saw some other girl jump off after me in the reflection, and she had long dark hair too, like my nightmare. But I was alone. Sometime later, my dad had a new girlfriend. She started to live with us, and she would feel that the house was haunted as well. She finally had enough and wanted to get the house blessed. So that happened. As the priest was blessing the house, we were all just following him, but I started to feel weird and uncomfortable. My body was getting sore. There was pain in all of my joints. Felt just like growing pains, but everywhere. When the priest was blessing my room, he said to us, "This room has the most energy in the entire house." I wasn't shocked, to be honest, because I already knew that. After the blessing, I told my father's girlfriend that my body was hurting. She went and massaged my body. I was doing exercises and stretches. My neck cracked, all my knuckles cracked, and my back as well, which I thought was very weird. I went straight to sleep after. However, after that day, I never had those reoccurring dreams. I never heard footsteps again. No shadows, no voices, nothing. It's been probably 7 years since I haven't experienced any paranormal activities since then. Now I constantly question myself. Did she follow me from the other house? Did she try to possess me? Was she good? Bad? What do you think? Don't play. Nathan and Josh, inspired by ghost hunting shows, decided to do their own expedition of an old abandoned hospital in their town. Their only equipment, however, was a single camcorder with no night vision. They were broke, yes, but this was just for fun in the end. Nathan became the cameraman, while Josh was the host. They were happy with the arrangement. Josh was, after all, more charismatic in front of the camera. Night came, and they entered the hospital. Starting at the entrance, Josh worked his vocal magic, explaining to the camera what they were doing, what he knew of the location, the recorded hauntings, rumors actually, and then started calling to the ghosts, asking for them to give them a sign of their presence. A cold air rushed in front of them, and Josh was ecstatic about it. Nathan, not so much. They walked into one of the hallways. Josh was about 5 steps ahead of Nate, and both were brandishing their flashlights all over. Doors were ajar, some lying on the floor, white wallpaper yellowed down and covered in grotesque graffiti. Plenty of messes on the floor. By the end of the hallway, Josh called for Nate's attention. He was pointing at something written on the wall in red. Don't play. Don't play, Josh said, heading towards the wall. What's the deal? Nate said. It's just graffiti. Josh put his hand on the letter Y and then looked at his fingers. He showed it to Nate, his face paling. His fingers were red. It's wet. They heard giggling, but didn't know where from. They bolted soon after. Ghost hunting and stuff was all right for them, but a wet painted sign with the words, "Don't play," that just screamed a warning to them. A local gang must have made the place their little hideout just recently, and that, and the giggling too, probably, was their polite way of saying F off. Still, video was video, and the two told their friends about their discovery. They gathered together in Nate's room to see it. Josh was blabbering on about the creepy atmosphere, but he and everyone else went quiet once the video started playing on his computer monitor. They listened to Josh's commentary, laughed at the funny moments. When the video reached the signed wall, Josh in the video put his hand on the Y and twisted his head around like an owl. The sound of cracking bones echoed in the ears so loudly, one of the viewers shouted. Video Josh stayed there on the screen, blinking at the camera as if he had no idea what just happened, before his eyes rolled back and his body slumped to the ground as the video faded to black, followed by a bout of familiar giggling and 2 words in red. Don't play. Another scream came, then another and another. Josh's body was on the floor, his head twisted 180, like in the video. Make sure the train runs on time. Late at night in the country, sound carries for much greater distances. That's because the electric hum of the Industrial Revolution is reduced to a subtle whisper. Nature's nightly symphony performs its background music for our palette of dreams. It's therefore free to resume its eternal ritual, since it's not competing for our oral lucidity. Silence is the steward of the night. Late on a cold winter's eve, you can hear the rolling drone of the great deceiver. Its shrill whistle blows in the night air with definitive urgency. If you were a stranger to the Apex Valley, you might assume it was on its regular passenger route through the nearby Danbury Mountains. The thing is, the Great Deceiver hasn't ran in more than 60 years. Its shiny black engine jumped off the tracks around a hairpin turn and careened down the side of the mountain. The deadly crash lost all the train cars and passengers therein. The forlorn whistle of the extinct beast is just an odd occurrence which the old-timers accept without debate. Younger members of the community are more open-minded and yet less willing to take the unexplained at face value. They were curious about the phenomena and anxious to find a scientific origin for the sound. A courageous cabal of them elected to camp on the mountainside and seek the truth to the local mystery. On an unseasonably cold October night, the Paranormal Exploratory College group set up camp near the scene of the fatal train accident. While overgrown, the rusty tracks were still visible in a few locations. As has been the bane of many serious endeavors, libations were consumed in large quantities. As the spirits flowed in excess, the students were soon too inebriated to recognize the danger that lay ahead. A slow, steady hum shook the tracks and increased until the powerful vibrations were impossible to ignore. When the phantom of the Great Deceiver came around the bend and approached their secluded campsite that night, they were just too drunk to care. It apparently rolled directly over their tents in its nightly journey into oblivion. Despite hefty rewards being offered, no trace of the college students were ever found. Their abandoned vehicles were located at the bottom of the mountain, at the end of the pavement, while the campsite was scattered about and destroyed. If you ask the old-timers, they'll tell you that the college kids were taken aboard the doomed vessel and will spend eternity being swept over the jagged edge of Danbury Mountain. There's no means of verifying or disproving that supernatural theory, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. After all, there has to be a dedicated crew to make sure the phantom train runs on time.